U.S. naval blocks near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran saying that it is going to respond. I want to bring in retired Naval Intelligence Commander Dr. Paul Chabot, who is joining us live. Dr. Chabot, thank you for joining us as always.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, a lot of developments. I want to start with the fact that Pakistan's preparing for these new round of talks, even as the president says, look, it's unlikely I'm going to renew this ceasefire. What are your takeaways from that?
Well, Pakistan's been involved in doing the best they can for negotiations between both the U.S. and Iran. What you're not seeing right now is Vice President, Vance on the tarmac speaking about going to Pakistan for negotiations with the Iranians. So, yeah, Trump has signaled pretty clearly that negotiations are off. And now we look at the timetable for when the ceasefire ends, and that's coming up shortly. There's sort of whiplash going on, right? From what we saw a few days ago to today, that it's difficult for us as viewers to really know truly what's going on behind the scenes. I will say that what's evolved from this process is that I feel as if we now have little confidence in who the Iranians are putting forward for negotiations, or we just simply have a sticking point where the ability to even have negotiations and what goes back to the Iranian leadership is not at all what the Iranian leadership is looking to provide. And I say that because over the weekend, you saw Trump make an announcement that things were looking good. The Iranians were going to open the strait. And that clearly did not happen. In fact, we've gone in reverse order, now basically boarding an Iranian flagged vessel over the last 24, 48 hours.
Absolutely. And Iran saying that it's going to, the Joint Military Command saying it's going to respond, which puts the ceasefire into even more questions as well, Dr. Chabot. I do think that whiplash that we're feeling is really the biggest takeaway right now, just given the fact that there was hope for peace really going into this weekend when we talked on Friday. And now it seems like we've almost done a complete 180 when it comes to that.
It has, and gas prices, even though they're still below about $100 a barrel, it's still fluctuating. Gas is still up about $1 where it was last year. And what we know economically is even if gas price or oil prices drop substantially, if there is good news in the coming days or weeks, it still takes many days, if not weeks, to see the gas prices here at home fluctuate to a range where we are more acceptable with that. I want to talk a little bit, though, about the U.S. destroyer that approached that flag Iranian ship yesterday, because this really signifies the first time that the blockade that we put in place, that basically the U.S. Navy means what it says and it will act on that. There was a short video out that showed one of our destroyers firing on an Iranian flagged vessel. What's interesting about that Iranian flagged vessel is that came from China and was back to resupply Iran. New information out today shows that it had mixed cargo on it. Now, given these are huge containers, I mean, it would take days to unload and look through everything. But initial indications are telling us that a lot of what was on there could have been used. They were not weapons themselves, but could have been used as parts to manufacture weapons, what historically we have seen come out of Asia, primarily China, back into Iran. And we may hear more about that in the coming days as well.
And that's interesting to hear about as well. What would you say are the big things that you're going to be watching over the next couple of days, just with that 8 p.m. deadline coming closer for tomorrow?
As that deadline gets closer, I would assume maybe that the U.S. military here is going to discuss more what was found on that Iranian flagged vessel to show the world that there were parts in there. I don't want to call them gyroscopes or electronics or canisters that could be used for missiles and targeting, to show that Iran continues to skirt international law, continues to import weapon materials, although not weapons themselves. And I do know that there is a sense, at least in Washington and amongst all of us, that we want to see a peaceful end to this. But I also feel we're at a point of no return because the negotiations are quite clear. What the United States is asking for to Iran is no nuclear capability for 20 years, with the exception of small enrichment for energy. Iran has rejected that and has said we will consider 5 years. So there is a wide gap here. And I think that's where Pakistan is continuing to look at the negotiations between the two sides, because that really is the primary issue right now, as well as opening up the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, because and that was what we saw reports last week, that Pakistan was trying to really mediate those sticking points as well, because both sides kind of have their heels dug in on both of those and aren't budging. And it seems like that if there is going to be a peace deal, like any compromise, there's going to have to be some give and take from both sides.
There is, and I think the US is also looking at this economically from an Iranian perspective, where right now, as the Strait of Hormuz is shut and there is a blockade only on Iranian ships coming to or from, or any ships going to or from Iranian ports, the rest of the Strait of Hormuz should technically be open. We're not interfering with traffic, but most vessels aren't going to go through there right now for fear of any sort of attack. But Iran right now is losing about $600 million up to $1 billion a day every day that we limit any ability for them to export their oil. And so there is a thought that as this continues, the economic hardship on Iran will continue to kind of squeeze. And what's important to remember is, even though right now a lot of uncertainty, whiplash, there is some good news in that, Israel and Lebanon are in peace talks. They're going to be in DC on Thursday. And a lot of these peace talks are a direct result of what's happening in the Middle East. When you think about Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon and attacks Israel, one of the four primary terror organizations on our list, as well as Israel's, Iran is going to lose funding, and a lot of that ends up going to these proxies. So there's a lot of different dynamics that play into this. I'm certain that Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, as well as CIA, has a lot of input into Trump's ear about the totality of what these negotiations will look like. But at least there is a silver lining in some sense that the Israel and Lebanon peace talks are going to continue in DC, I believe, Thursday of this week.
Retired Naval Intelligence Commander Dr. Paul Chabot, we always appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you so much for joining us, and we know you'll be paying attention to this along with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.